Back in the 1930s, a huge part of America just blew away. The sky literally turned black, and the land itself rose up into the air. It was the Great American Dust Bowl, and it changed the country forever. So how on earth did something like this happen?
Just try to imagine that for a second. Looking out your window and seeing a mountain of blackness coming right for you. It's turning the middle of the day into midnight. People who lived through it called them black blizzards, and for them it must have felt like the end of the world.
So what was going on here? Was this just a really, really bad drought, some kind of freak act of nature? Or was it a catastrophe that we brought on ourselves? That's the big question we're going to dig into. Well, the evidence points to a pretty shocking conclusion. The Dust Bowl wasn't just a case of bad weather. Nope. It was a failure of an entire system, a system that pushed the land way past its breaking point. The Dust Bowl is actually a perfect example of what experts call a socio-ecological catastrophe. Now, I know that's a mouthful, but it's just a way of saying it was a disaster caused by a collision between us, our society, our choices, our economy, and the natural world. So, how did this collision happen? Well, think of it like a recipe for total disaster. You have several key ingredients, and when you mix them all together, you get the perfect storm.
Okay, ingredient number 1. The land itself. The Great Plains are naturally pretty dry and super windy, and there's this invisible line on the map, the 100th meridian, that's a really important climate boundary. East of it, you usually get enough rain to farm, but to the west, it's much, much drier. The problem was, settlers were trying to farm like they were in the east, but in a totally different western climate.
Next up, you add a really bad idea. A really bad idea. A lot of people back then believed in this myth called rain follows the plow. They seriously thought that if they just plowed up the prairie, it would magically make it rain more. This gave them this completely false confidence to just tear up the entire landscape. And then, throw in a flawed government policy. The Homestead Act gave families 160 acres of land. Now, that sounds like a lot, right? But out in the dry West, it was way too small to actually support a family. So, to survive, they had to plow up every single inch, leaving none of the natural grass that had been holding the soil down for centuries. So, let's recap. We've got a risky landscape, a dangerous myth, and a flawed policy. The final ingredients that kicked everything into high gear were huge economic pressures and brand new technology. All this led to what we now call the Great Plow Up. It was a total economic roller coaster. First, during World War I, the price of wheat went through the roof, so farmers plowed millions of new acres to cash in. But then, after the war, prices crashed. And then, the Great Depression hit. Now farmers were just desperate, so they plowed even more land, trying to grow anything they could just to pay their bills. And here's the real mistake. Right down in the dirt. Farmers tore out the native prairie grass. That stuff had incredibly deep, tangled roots that basically acted like a giant net holding the soil together. And they replaced it with wheat, which has really shallow roots. So every year after the harvest, the soil was just left bare, naked, and completely defenseless. To make everything even worse, new machines like tractors and something called the one-way disc plow were incredibly efficient, almost too efficient. They didn't just turn the soil over, they pulverized it, grinding it into a fine powder, basically making it perfectly ready for the wind to just pick it up and carry it away. So, all the ingredients are now in the bowl. You've got the dry land, the bad ideas, the economic desperation, and all this exposed, powdered soil. The only thing missing was the trigger. And that trigger was a massive, decade-long drought. And then, the sky fell.
And these weren't just dust storms. Oh no. They were black blizzards. The friction from all those dirt particles flying through the air created so much static electricity, it was powerful enough to short out a car's engine. People said you could get knocked right off your feet if you touched another person. Can you imagine?
The scale of this destruction it's just almost impossible to wrap your head around. In just 1 year, 1935, an estimated 850 million tons of rich, fertile topsoil, the very life of the plains, was just gone, blown away. And to put that into perspective, by 1935, an area of farmland about the size of the entire state of California had lost most or all of its topsoil. The land was, for all intents and purposes, completely destroyed for farming. And this dust wasn't just a pain to clean up, it was a killer. People were breathing this fine, gritty dust day in and day out, which led to a terrible sickness they called dust pneumonia. It just clogged up their lungs, and for hundreds, maybe even thousands of people, it was fatal. So, with their farms gone, their livelihoods destroyed, and their health failing, millions of people had no choice. They had to leave. The Dust Bowl sparked one of the biggest migrations in all of American history. 2.5 million people. Think about that. They essentially became climate refugees in their own country. They packed up whatever they had left, piled into their cars, and headed west, mostly to California, just hoping to find work and a new start. But they weren't exactly welcomed with open arms. In what has to be one of the most shocking parts of this story, the Los Angeles Police Department actually sent its officers to the state borders to set up a blockade. They tried to turn away their own fellow Americans, calling them undesirables. It's just heartbreaking. This whole catastrophe was a brutal, brutal lesson. It forced the entire country to wake up and realize it had to completely change its relationship with the land. It really kicked off a new era of conservation and healing. And there's this incredible story about a soil scientist named Hugh Hammond Bennett. He was in Washington, D.C., literally begging Congress to take soil erosion seriously. And right as he's giving his testimony, a massive dust storm all the way from the plains rolls into the city and darkens the sky. The problem literally showed up on their doorstep. You can't make this stuff up. Well, Congress finally got the message. They created the Soil Conservation Service, which taught farmers a whole new toolkit of techniques. Things like contour plowing, which means you plow with the curves of the land. They planted huge shelter belts of trees to block the wind, and they used cover crops to make sure the soil was never, ever left bare and exposed again. So, what's the big takeaway from all this? I think it's this. The Dust Bowl proved that our soil is not permanent. It's a precious, living thing that we can lose if we're not careful. It taught us that how we treat the land has massive consequences for all of us. And that leaves us with a really important question. As we face all new kinds of environmental challenges today, are we actually remembering the lessons that were written in the dust?